When a struggling farmer discovers a hidden door in his barn that leads to a fortune in stolen Nazi gold, he must choose between financial salvation and becoming complicit in his grandfather's darkest secret. The smell hit Marcus Hoffman first. Not hay or manure, but something metallic and wrong. Like pennies left in rain, October 2019, the Montana wind howled through gaps in the barn's weathered siding. But the odor came from deeper inside, from places wind couldn't reach. Marcus pressed his palm against the barn's central beam, feeling the wood vibrate with each gust. 43 years old, and he'd never noticed how the beam felt hollow. His phone buzzed. Another text from the bank. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings begin Monday. The metallic smell grew stronger as he moved toward the beam. Not rust, not old tools. Something else entirely. Something that made his German shepherd Klaus whine and retreat to the barn's entrance, hackles raised. Marcus ran his fingers along the beam's surface, searching for the source of the odor. The wood felt different here, newer, despite the barn's age. His fingertips found an almost invisible seam running vertically along the timber, a hidden panel, the smell of old metal and something darker. Something that reminded him of the war. Museums his grandfather had forbidden him to visit leaked through the crack like a confession waiting to be heard. Marcus pried at the seam with his pocket knife. The panel gave way with a soft click, revealing a narrow space behind the beam. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a brass key unlike any he'd ever seen. Its head bore an eagle clutching a swastika, Nazi imagery that made his stomach clench. But it wasn't just the key that made his hands shake. It was the photograph tucked beneath it. His grandfather, Heinrich Hoffmann, stood in a Wehrmacht uniform beside a train car. But Heinrich wasn't a soldier in this picture. He wore civilian clothes over the uniform, and his expression held something Marcus had never seen in family photos. Cold calculation. Behind Heinrich, barely visible in the photograph's background, stood a barn. This barn, Marcus turned the photo over. Someone had written in faded German, Der letzte Transport, Oktober 1944. Das Gold ist sicher. The last transport, October 1944. The gold is safe. His grandfather had died when Marcus was 12, taking his stories of the old country with him. But this photograph suggested stories Heinrich had never told. Stories about trains and gold and secrets buried in Montana soil. The key felt heavier than brass should feel, as if it carried the weight of decades. Klaus barked once from the doorway, sharp and urgent. Marcus pocketed the key and photograph, his mind racing. His grandfather had immigrated to America in 1945, buying this land with cash when most farmers could barely afford seed. Marcus had always assumed Heinrich had been lucky, industrious. He'd never considered other possibilities. The key led Marcus to his grandfather's old workshop, a concrete bunker Heinrich had built behind the main house. Marcus had played here as a child, but certain areas had always been off limits. Dangerous chemicals, his grandfather would say. Old farming equipment, not for children. Now, with the key in his hand, Marcus saw the workshop differently. The concrete walls were thicker than necessary. The floor plan made no sense. Too much wasted space, as if the visible room was only part of a larger structure. And in the far corner, hidden behind a workbench that hadn't moved in decades, Marcus found what the key was meant to open. A steel door, painted to match the concrete walls. Nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. The key turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been maintained, despite years of concealment. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The metallic smell from the barn was stronger here, mixed with something else, the musty odor of old paper and leather. Marcus descended slowly, his phone's flashlight cutting through shadows that seemed reluctant to retreat. The underground chamber was larger than his house. Steel shelving lined the walls filled with wooden crates marked with German text and Nazi eagles. But it wasn't the crates that made Marcus's breath catch. It was the filing cabinets, dozens of them, organized with Germanic precision. Each drawer labeled with dates, locations, and numbers that meant nothing to Marcus, but everything to someone who needed to keep meticulous records. He opened the nearest cabinet. Inside, hundreds of documents in German, English, and other languages he couldn't identify. Shipping manifests, bank transfers, lists of names with amounts beside them, amounts that made Marcus's foreclosure notice seem trivial. At the front of the first drawer, a leather journal bore his grandfather's name and the dates 1943, 1947. You need to stop digging. Marcus. Sheriff Tom Bradley stood in Marcus's kitchen the next morning, coffee growing cold between his weathered hands. They'd known each other since high school, but Tom's expression held no warmth now. Stop digging into what? Marcus kept his voice level, though the journal's contents burned in his memory. Heinrich hadn't just been a Nazi collaborator. He'd been a coordinator, helping to move stolen wealth from concentration camps to safe houses across America. Your grandfather's business. Some stones are better left unturned. What do you know about Heinrich's business, Tom? The sheriff's jaw tightened. I know he helped a lot of families in this county get started, including mine. My grandfather bought his first ranch with a loan from Heinrich. No interest, no questions asked. Marcus felt the pieces clicking together. How many families, Tom? Enough. Tom stood, his hand resting on his service weapon, not a threat, but a reminder. Heinrich Hoffman was a good man who helped build this community. Whatever you think you found, you're wrong. And if I'm not wrong? Tom's eyes hardened. Then you'll keep it to yourself, for everyone's sake. After the sheriff left, Marcus returned to the underground chamber. He'd only scratched the surface of Heinrich's records, but already the scope was staggering. Millions of dollars in gold, artwork, and currency had passed through this operation. Money stolen from Jewish families, resistance fighters, and anyone else the Nazis had deemed expendable. His grandfather hadn't just been a collaborator. He'd been a profiteer, and according to the journal, much of the wealth was still here. Marcus spent 3 days reading Heinrich's journal, each page revealing new horrors. His grandfather had been part of a network that helped Nazi officials escape to South America, but Heinrich had been smarter than most. Instead of fleeing, he'd stayed and built a new life with stolen wealth. The journal detailed everything: Swiss bank accounts, hidden caches, and a network of American accomplices who'd helped launder the money through legitimate businesses. Ranches, banks, even the local church, all built with blood money. But it was the final entry that made Marcus's hands shake. The boy asks too many questions about the old country. I've told him his parents died in the bombing, but he's starting to remember. If he ever learns the truth, that I killed them myself for their resistance activities, everything will be lost. The gold must stay hidden. The network must survive. Some secrets are worth more than family. Marcus dropped the journal, his world tilting. His parents hadn't died in Allied bombing. Heinrich had murdered them, the man Marcus had loved as a grandfather, who'd taught him to farm and fish and fix engines, had killed his own son and daughter-in-law for opposing the Nazi regime, and Marcus was the heir to everything Heinrich had built with their blood. He found the main cache that evening, hidden beneath the chamber's false floor, gold bars stamped with Nazi eagles, jewelry that had once belonged to families who'd died in camps, artwork stolen from museums across Europe. Conservative estimate, $40 million, enough to save his farm 100 times over, enough to secure his family's future for generations, all of it paid for with innocent blood. The visitors came at dawn. Marcus was cataloging the cache when he heard vehicles in his driveway. Through the chamber's periscope, another of Heinrich's paranoid additions, he watched 3 black SUVs disgorge men in expensive suits. They moved with military precision, surrounding his house and barn. Not FBI or local law enforcement, something else. Marcus climbed to ground level and locked the workshop door behind him. By the time he reached his front porch, the men had formed a semicircle around his house. Their leader, a silver-haired man with pale eyes, stepped forward. Mr. Hoffman, I'm David Kruger, representing certain interested parties. We understand you've been exploring your family history. I don't know what you mean. Kruger smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Your grandfather was a valued associate of our organization. We've been monitoring his assets for decades, waiting for the right moment to reclaim them. What organization? Let's just say we share Heinrich's appreciation for order and efficiency. Kruger gestured to his men. We're prepared to offer you a generous finder's fee for your cooperation. 10% of whatever you've discovered. Marcus did the math. $4 million. More than enough to save his farm and live comfortably for the rest of his life. And if I refuse, then you'll join your parents in an unfortunate accident. Kruger's smile widened. Heinrich was very thorough in his record-keeping. We know exactly what happened to them. The threat hung in the air like smoke. These weren't just treasure hunters. They were the network Heinrich had written about, Nazis and their descendants who'd spent decades building power in America. I need time to think. Of course. 24 hours should be sufficient. Kruger handed him a business card. Don't disappoint us, Mr. Hoffman. We've invested too much in this operation to let sentiment interfere with business. That night, Marcus found Heinrich's final secret. Hidden behind the last filing cabinet, a steel door led to an even deeper chamber. Inside, Heinrich had built a shrine to his true beliefs, Nazi flags, photographs of concentration camps, and detailed plans for something called Operation Resurrection. The plans were dated 2020. Heinrich hadn't just been a war profiteer. He'd been planning a comeback. The stolen wealth was meant to fund a new Nazi movement in America. The network Kruger represented wasn't just treasure hunters. They were the inheritors of Heinrich's vision. They'd been waiting for Marcus to discover the cash so they could claim it and fund their operations. But Heinrich had included one final surprise, a letter addressed to Marcus, sealed and dated just weeks before the old man's death. If you're reading this, then they found you. I hoped you'd never have to face this choice, but blood calls to blood. You are my heir in all things, my wealth, my sins, and my responsibilities. The gold can save your farm, but it will damn your soul. Use it, and you become part of what I built. Refuse it, and they'll kill you as they killed your parents. There is a third option. In the chamber's northeast corner, behind the false wall, you'll find enough explosives to destroy everything. The choice is yours. Inherit my legacy, or end it forever. I pray you're stronger than I was. Your grandfather, Heinrich Hoffman. Marcus found the explosives exactly where Heinrich had promised. Enough C4 to collapse the entire underground complex and everything in it. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus was preparing the explosives when he heard a familiar voice calling from above. Sarah Chen, the investigative journalist who'd been researching Nazi war criminals for the past decade. They'd dated briefly in college before life had pulled them in different directions. Marcus? I know you're down there. He climbed to the workshop, finding Sarah standing beside the open door. Her expression mixed concern with professional determination. How did you... I've been tracking Heinrich's network for years. When property records showed you'd inherited his land, I knew it was only a matter of time. She gestured toward the hidden entrance. May I? Marcus led her into the chamber, watching her face as she took in the scope of Heinrich's operation. Sarah had seen Nazi horrors before, but this was different. This was personal. My grandmother was at Auschwitz, she said quietly, examining one of the stolen paintings. She lost everything, family, home, identity. Spent her whole life wondering what happened to her parents' wedding rings. Sarah picked up a small jewelry box from one of the crates. Inside, dozens of wedding rings glinted in the artificial light. One of these might be theirs. Marcus felt the weight of $40 million pressing down on him. Sarah, there's something you need to know about why I called you here. But before he could explain about Kruger's ultimatum, Sarah's expression changed. She was staring at something behind him, Heinrich's journal, open to a page Marcus hadn't meant to leave visible. You knew, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You knew what he was, and you called me here anyway. Sarah, I can explain. You're just like him. Her hand moved toward her phone. You're going to try to buy my silence, aren't you? Offer me a cut to keep quiet about what you found. Marcus realized with growing horror that Sarah thought he was part of the network, that he'd called her here to either recruit her or eliminate her. That's not, I would never. Save it. Sarah backed toward the stairs, phone in hand. I'm calling the FBI. This ends now. The woman he'd hoped would help him do the right thing now saw him as the enemy. And in 6 hours, Kruger would return for his answer. Marcus sat alone in the chamber, surrounded by the fruits of genocide. The choice before him was stark. Take Kruger's offer and become complicit in funding a new Nazi movement, or destroy everything and likely die in the process. But Sarah's reaction had shown him a third possibility, one that terrified him more than death. What if he was already complicit? What if growing up on land bought with blood money, eating food grown in soil fertilized by stolen wealth, had already made him part of Heinrich's legacy? The farm that had been in his family for 3 generations was built on murder. Every meal, every Christmas morning, every moment of happiness he'd experienced here had been paid for with innocent lives. $4 million could save everything he'd ever known. But it would also fund the murder of people like Sarah's grandmother, people whose only crime was existing in a world that had decided they didn't belong. Marcus thought about his own children. Who would inherit whatever choice he made? Did he want to pass down Heinrich's wealth or Heinrich's sins? The explosives sat in their neat rows, enough to erase 75 years of carefully hidden evil. But destroying the evidence wouldn't bring back the dead. It wouldn't return the stolen wealth to its rightful owners, and it wouldn't save his farm. Marcus picked up one of the gold bars, feeling its weight. Enough wealth to secure his family's future, bought with other families' destruction. The moral calculus was simple, even if the choice wasn't. How many future victims was his farm worth? Kruger returned at sunset with twice as many men. Marcus met them in his driveway, the detonator hidden in his jacket pocket. He'd spent the afternoon rigging the explosives, connecting them to a dead man's switch that would trigger if his heart stopped beating. "Have you reached a decision, Mr. Hoffman?" "I have." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Kruger the screen. "I've uploaded everything to a secure server. Heinrich's journal, photographs of the cache, documentation of your network. If I don't check in every 12 hours, it all goes public." Kruger's composure cracked. "You're making a serious mistake. The mistake was made 75 years ago. I'm just cleaning up the mess. You'll lose everything. Your farm, your family's legacy. My family's legacy is murder." Marcus's voice carried a conviction that surprised him. "I won't build my children's future on other people's graves." Kruger signaled his men, who began moving toward the house. "Then you'll join your parents in their unfortunate fate." Marcus smiled grimly. "I don't think so." He pulled the detonator from his pocket, thumb hovering over the trigger. "The explosives are rigged to my heartbeat. Kill me, and $40 million in Nazi gold becomes a very expensive hole in the ground." The men stopped advancing. Kruger's face went white. "You're bluffing. Heinrich taught me to be thorough." Marcus backed toward his truck, keeping the detonator visible. "You have 10 minutes to get off my property before I decide that some treasures are too dangerous to exist." For a moment, the standoff held. Then Kruger made a gesture, and his men began retreating to their vehicles. "This isn't over, Hoffman." "Yes, it is." Marcus waited until the SUVs disappeared before calling Sarah. She answered on the first ring, her voice cautious. "I'm sorry I doubted you," she said before he could speak. "I found Heinrich's letter in the FBI database. I know what you're trying to do. Then you know I need your help. What do you need?" Marcus looked toward the workshop, where $40 million in stolen wealth waited in the darkness. "I need you to help me give it back." 6 months later, Marcus stood in his empty farmhouse, watching the moving truck disappear down the dirt road. The farm was gone, sold to pay legal fees and restitution claims. The FBI had seized Heinrich's cash, but not before Marcus and Sarah had identified dozens of families who could prove ownership of stolen items. Wedding rings returned to grandchildren who'd never expected to see them. Paintings restored to museums that had given up hope of recovery. The network Kruger represented had scattered when the story broke, their carefully hidden assets frozen by international law enforcement. Some had been arrested. Others had simply vanished, their decades-long plans crumbling in the face of public exposure. Marcus had lost everything his grandfather had built, but he'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that his children would inherit clean hands. Sarah found him on the porch, holding the keys to his new apartment in town. He'd taken a job at the Agricultural Extension Office, honest work that paid enough to live on, if not to prosper. "Any regrets?" she asked. Marcus thought about the question seriously. He'd given up generational wealth, a family legacy, and the only life he'd ever known. His children would grow up in apartments instead of on a ranch, would work for their success instead of inheriting it. But they would also grow up knowing that their father had chosen justice over comfort, truth over convenience. "None," he said, and meant it. The Montana wind carried the scent of new growth from the fields where other farmers with clean money and clear consciences, were planting their spring crops. The land would endure as it always had, but it would no longer be stained with blood. Some legacies, Marcus had learned, were worth more than gold, even when gold was all you had. When a struggling farmer discovers his grandfather's hidden Nazi treasure, he must choose between financial salvation and moral redemption, learning that some inheritances are too costly to claim. Would you have made the same choice? Could you give up everything to right a wrong you didn't commit? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the weight of family secrets and the price of redemption. Next week, we'll uncover the lighthouse keeper's final message, a tale of isolation, guilt, and the lengths one man will go to protect a secret that could destroy everything he loves. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss this haunting story of sacrifice and truth.